Welcome to our channel, where we delve into some of the most chilling and infamous criminal cases in history. Today, we're taking you on a journey into the twisted mind of one of America's most notorious serial killers, Jeffrey Dahmer. His gruesome acts of violence shocked the nation and left an indelible mark on the annals of true crime. In this video, we'll uncover the disturbing details of Dahmer's life and crimes, from his early years to his capture and the shocking revelations that followed. Brace yourself for a chilling exploration of the mind of a serial killer as we recount the terrifying story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal. In the quiet, unsuspecting city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a dark and chilling tale unfolded. Jeffrey Dahmer, a seemingly ordinary man, would become one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. His gruesome crimes shocked the world, leaving a scar on the collective consciousness. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His childhood seemed unremarkable at first glance. Raised in a middle-class family, he appeared to be an average boy. However, early signs of trouble were already emerging. Dahmer's fascination with dissecting animals hinted at a macabre curiosity that would later consume him. Dahmer's parents divorced when he was a teenager, leaving him emotionally scarred. He became increasingly withdrawn, using alcohol as a means to escape his inner turmoil. This descent into darkness was only the beginning. Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder occurred in June 1978, shortly after his high school graduation. His victim was a young hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. Dahmer, then 18 years old, encountered Hicks at a bar. He lured Hicks to his family's home in Ohio with the promise of drinking alcohol together. Once Hicks was inside the house, the situation took a horrifying turn. Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks to death with a dumbbell. This brutal act marked the beginning of Dahmer's descent into a life of heinous crimes. After killing Hicks, Dahmer dismembered his body and buried the remains in the backyard. It was a crime that remained hidden from the authorities for years. This murder served as a disturbing precursor to the series of gruesome crimes that would later define Dahmer's reign of terror in Milwaukee. The 1980s saw Dahmer's descent into monstrous depravity. He developed a sinister modus operandi. He would frequent gay bars, seeking out young men. He would lure them to his apartment with promises of money or alcohol. Once there, he would drug them and then subject them to horrifying acts of sexual assault and violence. Dahmer's apartment became a house of horrors. He photographed his victims in various stages of torment and death. His methods of disposing of the bodies ranged from acid baths to dismemberment, with parts stored as gruesome trophies. The chilling aspect of Dahmer's crimes was his ability to avoid detection. There were close calls with the police, including encounters where his victims managed to escape, only to be returned to him by law enforcement. In July 1991, Dahmer's reign of terror was nearly exposed when Tracy Edwards, a potential victim, managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment. Edwards had been lured to Dahmer's home under the pretense of drinking together. Inside, he discovered the horrifying truth. Dahmer had handcuffed him and intended to assault him. Edwards bravely fought back, and when Dahmer momentarily left the room, he seized the opportunity to escape. He encountered two police officers and led them back to Dahmer's apartment. The police, accompanied by Edwards, entered Dahmer's apartment. What they found was beyond horrifying. Polaroid photos of dismembered bodies, preserved body parts in containers, and severed heads filled the apartment. Dahmer had kept these gruesome trophies as mementos of his victims. Dahmer's apartment was a horrifying crime scene. Investigators discovered a gruesome assortment of body parts, including preserved heads, torsos, limbs, and genitalia. Some of these remains were stored in containers, while others were found in his refrigerator and freezer. Containers of acid and chemicals were found, which Dahmer used to dissolve the flesh and bones of his victims. These substances facilitated the disposal of evidence by breaking down the remains. Large vats and drums were discovered, in which Dahmer stored and decomposed his victims' bodies. These containers were macabre evidence of his systematic and calculated approach to disposing of his victims. The camera and film used to capture the chilling photographs were recovered. These items linked Dahmer directly to the visual evidence of his crimes. Police found human remains in Dahmer's refrigerator and freezer, including heads and other body parts wrapped in plastic bags. The refrigerator held particularly gruesome evidence of his crimes. Personal belongings and identification of some victims were also discovered in Dahmer's apartment. These items further linked him to the victims and confirmed their presence at his residence. Forensic analysis revealed extensive blood stains and biological residue throughout the apartment, including on walls and floors. These findings provided physical evidence of the violence that had occurred there. During interrogations, Dahmer confessed to his crimes in chilling detail. His admissions matched the physical evidence discovered in his apartment and corroborated the accounts of surviving victims. Statements from neighbors and witnesses who had observed suspicious activities around Dahmer's apartment building played a role in alerting authorities to his actions. These testimonies helped initiate the investigation. The evidence was overwhelming. Dahmer was arrested, and the shock reverberated through the community. Dahmer's trial was a gruesome spectacle. He confessed to his crimes in horrifying detail, leaving jurors and spectators in disbelief. Dahmer was charged with 17 murders in total. His trial commenced in 1992. Despite an insanity defense, he was found guilty of all charges and received 16 consecutive life sentences in prison. Later, he was charged with an additional murder, resulting in a total of 17 life sentences. The impact of his confession was immeasurable, exposing the depths of human depravity. The verdict was swift and unequivocal: guilty. Dahmer was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. Life in prison was not kind to Dahmer. He faced constant threats and violence from fellow inmates. Despite his heinous crimes, he became a target of brutal attacks. In November 1994, his life came to a brutal end when he was bludgeoned to death by a fellow inmate. The motive behind the killings might be he had a deep-seated sexual sadism, meaning he derived sexual pleasure from inflicting pain and suffering on others. His killings often involved acts of torture and violence, which fulfilled his sadistic desires. Dahmer had a strong attraction to dead bodies, known as necrophilia. He engaged in sexual acts with his victims' corpses, suggesting that part of his motivation was to have sexual access to lifeless bodies. Serial killers often seek to exert control and domination over their victims. Dahmer's acts of murder and dismemberment allowed him to exercise complete control over his victims, fulfilling a psychological need for dominance. Dahmer led a socially isolated and lonely life. His inability to form meaningful connections with others may have intensified his psychological disturbances and fueled his need to possess victims. The legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes endures. His case serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the seemingly ordinary. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, the failures of law enforcement, and the enduring trauma left in the wake of his reign of terror. Dahmer's name lives on in infamy, a stark testament to the capacity for unspeakable horror within the human soul.